Welcome to the Grounded Mage, fellow mages. I would say welcome back, but this is only the first episode, so we're not going to get carried away here. A little bit of background on me. I love mythology stories. I love lore stories. I love superhero stories. I love all types of stories, and I love to look into them, relate them to real life. Why? Because I did not grow up in a great situation. I grew up on the poverty line with a single parent, struggled to pay rent, struggled to do a lot of things. The neighborhood that I lived in for a lot of my formative years was a neighborhood that everybody just avoided because they knew that it was a bad news neighborhood. I also had people around me who struggled with addiction and mental illness. So to escape that, I turned to books. And I read books all the time, even if it was like, let's watch a movie as a family. And I was like, I'm just going to sit in this corner and read my book because I didn't want to be in this world. I wanted to escape to a place that was magical, a place that was better, a place that had a happy ending. And it wasn't until I was probably in my 20s that I realized I was applying a lot of the lessons from these stories that I was reading to my real life. So I could talk about myself all day, but that's not why you're here. You're here to find out why the villains of the stories are the ones actually telling us the truth. So let's get into it. I don't know about you, but as I get older, I feel like I'm starting to resonate more with the villains of these stories than I am with the heroes. Not that I think the villains' actions are justified, but the experiences that have led to their thoughts and their actions, I can understand more and more as I get older. Now, please don't get it twisted. I'm in no way saying that the heroes of these stories should not be celebrated. They are brave, of course. They're talented, they're charismatic, they're trying to make a difference for good in the world. The point is for them to win and triumph over evil. But think about it. Are most of us in this mindset? Do any of us have plot armor in the real world to protect us from bad things happening to us because the greater universe knows that we have something better to do later? No, of course not. We all have trauma. We all have experiences that have made us a little bitter, if not very bitter, towards other people and the world in general. Heroes may be inspiring, but the villains are the ones telling us the truth. Think about this. Loki doesn't pretend he doesn't crave power. Magneto doesn't deny his rage against injustice. Killmonger doesn't soften his grief. And Darth Vader does not hide behind being polite. They just put it all out there. Meanwhile, the heroes of these stories, the ones we are supposed to admire, often spend entire arcs avoiding the very things that they're feeling. They repress, they deny, they wear masks. Peter Parker repressed his guilt over Uncle Ben's death, and he channeled it into obsessive crime fighting to save every single person in crisis that he could. Frodo hides his fear and despair and even the burden of the ring, believing that it's his alone to carry. Achilles withdraws from battle after King Agamemnon insults him by stealing the woman he took as a prize of war. So not only did he hide his feelings of betrayal, but withdrawing from that battle actually had dire consequences for the Greek forces. And yes, these heroes eventually face these feelings and use them to become better at what they do, but there's still a conservativeness to them that feels a little fake. So then why are the villains so captivating? Because they're honest from the very beginning. That honesty, regardless of the horrible actions they're committing, is what makes them feel so relatable. So today, I want to explore why the villain resonates with us so deeply, where they go wrong in their mindset, how Carl Jung's idea of the shadow shows up in them, and most importantly, what it means for our own lives. To start this bluntly, Villains are not hiding their desires. Villains are direct. They tell us what they want and exactly how they feel. Loki says, I am burdened with glorious purpose. The Joker said, in their last moments, people show you who they really are. So, in a way, I knew your friends better than you did. Voldemort said, there is no good and evil. There is only power, and those too weak to seek it. They're raw, they're blunt, they're messy. But why is it captivating? Because we all have times where we wish we could say what's on our minds, but we hesitate because other people would find our opinions upsetting. We cater to the world around us. The villains don't do that. Heroes, on the other hand, bury their flaws. We see this with Tony Stark. He hides his insecurity with ego and humor. Superman hides his loneliness behind the cape. Even Harry Potter, the chosen one, denies his anger and his trauma until he just can't control his words or his magic. I mean, do you remember when he blew up his aunt? Heroes hide behind good deeds as a way of masking what they really want. The villains, however, embody the desires that heroes and us regular folk pretend don't exist. The desire for attention, for justice, even the desire to be powerful. And when it comes to attention, I don't think any villain comes to mind faster than Loki. Everything he does is for attention, and not just from anyone. He wants Odin's attention. Odin adopted him, made him believe he was a god of Asgard, and yet he can still feel that he's pushed aside. So he doesn't care if the attention is positive or negative, as long as he's getting the attention. Wanting justice? It doesn't sound villainous, but sometimes it depends on who's looking for it. In X-Men, Magneto wants justice, but because the mutants are seen as abominations and evil, he's automatically the bad guy for wanting that. Did he do some terrible things to show that he wanted justice for his people? Yes, absolutely. But if you're able to put yourself in his position, can you really fault him for doing what he did? Now, wanting power, usually we associate that with magic. A villain like Voldemort wanted all of the most powerful objects. He wanted all of the Deathly Hallows because he believed that would make him the most powerful wizard in the world. But there's another side to wanting power. Think of a villain like Kingpin. He wants political power. He wants to be able to be in control of everything in his city, no matter what level it's at. And he's not afraid to be feared. In fact, it's what he wants. It's a tactic that he prefers. He wants the public to know not to mess with him, and he sends some very clear messages to show why. So the villains are not sugarcoating anything. Sure, some of them do wear a physical mask, but who doesn't have a personal life that they're trying to protect? These characters are making it clear from the get-go what their goals and desires are, and what they'll do to achieve what they really want. Enter Jung's shadow. So I really wanted to talk about Carl Jung today because his theory actually ties into the villain quite well. If you haven't studied psychology, you probably still know this guy, Sigmund Freud. He believed there were 3 layers of the self, the id, the ego, and the superego. He also believed that we were all sexually obsessed with our parents, so we're not going to talk about him today. He's useless. We're going to talk about Carl Jung, who was a colleague of Freud's. He did study Freud's work and eventually developed his own theory of the self, where he went a little bit deeper with an explanation. And he had 4 layers of self: the persona, the ego, the self, and the shadow. So I'm going to break these down as quickly as I can. The persona is the person you show to the rest of the world, the people that you don't know very well, your work colleagues, people at the mall, people at the grocery store. It's that mask we wear when we're in public. Your ego is still conscious. You are aware of this part of yourself, and you only show it to the people who are closest to you, your spouse, your best friends, your family, people who are not going to judge you for being the way that you are. The self is humanity's ultimate goal, according to Carl Jung. And that is when you combine your unconscious self with your conscious self. Most people don't get there. Some people spend a lifetime trying to get there, and very few people actually do get that far. And then we have our shadow. Now, our shadow is the parts of ourselves that we repress. The anger we're told to swallow, the envy we pretend we don't feel, the ambition we keep tucked away because it doesn't look nice. This is the part that we associate with the villains of these stories, right? How does it relate to this topic? It's because the villains are the shadow externalized. They take all of those buried, repressed, and ugly materials and they put it on display. They wear it as their armor. That's why a villain like Darth Vader is so terrifying and also so compelling. You have to look at Vader and Luke as two sides of the same coin. Darth Vader is Luke's potential shadow. Without the guidance of his mentors, Yoda and Obi-Wan, Luke is Vader. Because there was no balance between his shadow and his ego, Anakin became Vader. Jung had said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The villains of these stories are the unconscious made conscious. They're not calling anything fate. They know that they're making their own paths. And that's why they feel so dangerous. But it's also why, as we get older, they feel so familiar to us. So let's be honest. A lot of us resonate with the villains more than the heroes. But why? It's because they speak the feelings we are not allowed to voice. They speak the things that society gasps at when they hear them. Things like anger at injustice, the craving for recognition, the hunger for control, and the need to belong, even if it's through fear. When Killmonger demands his place on the throne, people nod. Wakanda was his father's vision. T'Challa is only king because his father murdered Killmonger's father. We can see why he is the way he is. When Magneto rages against persecution, we get it. He's tired of being oppressed and hidden by the world, and who wouldn't be? When Loki schemes for attention, many of us think, same. We all want to be seen for the abilities and want recognition for the things that we can do. And in Loki's case, he wants Odin to see him as equal. He doesn't want to be second to Thor. And anyone who has an older sibling can relate to that. I'm sure that my brother can. Watching villains is like therapy. They're not afraid to speak out on the problems with society. They let out what we've locked in. The villains are honest, but this is what's wrong with their mindset. They stop at expression. They never move toward a transformation. So we should also remember that every villain starts with a wound. An orphaned child, a lost love, a culture destroyed, a family broken. Killmonger grew up abandoned by his own nation, forced to live in poverty in a nation that showed no mercy to those who have no money. Anakin lost his mother, then he lost his wife. Loki always knew he was second best, and Magneto survived the Holocaust. Their anger and pain are real. That's why we don't just dismiss them. The tragedy, again, is villains take that pain and freeze it into an identity. They stop growing. Where the hero integrates their wound and learns from it, the villain becomes defined by it. That's why they're honest, but incomplete. They've stopped the journey of individuation halfway. Okay, I just want to touch on what I like to call the perceived villain. These are people who we see as villainous because of the way they look or the job that they have to do. So let's look at someone like Medusa, right? We know her as terrifying, right? Snakes for hair, a petrifying gaze. She's called the Slayer of Men. But the truth is she wasn't born that way. She was actually born a beautiful mortal priestess, and she was the victim of someone else's rage. Medusa had promised to serve the virgin goddess Athena, and in doing so, had to promise that she would remain a virgin herself for the rest of her life. Now, the sea god Poseidon was infatuated with Medusa, and that infatuation eventually led to him pursuing her and assaulting her in Athena's temple. And Athena was infuriated. She did not believe in such acts, but Poseidon was the brother of Zeus, who is also known for not keeping it in his pants. And because he was Zeus's brother, she couldn't do anything to punish Poseidon, so she punished Medusa instead, giving her eternal life, making her a Gorgon, making sure that she could not get close to anyone ever again, because anyone she looked at would turn to stone. And her sisters did try to help her. Medusa's sisters came to Athena and said this is not her fault, and Athena wasn't having it. She just turned them into Gorgons as well and sent them on their way. And this happens in real life a lot. We see that victims try to defend themselves, but because the people who wronged them have more power than they do, they get pushed aside. And anyone who tries to come to their defense also gets pushed aside by society. So what happens to those victims? They become angry, they shut down, they distrust people in general. And then others see them as antisocial and rude. Now, there are some people who are wronged by society and go about it in the wrong ways because they can't process that trauma. Think Eileen Wuornos or Otis Toole and Henry Lee Lucas. These people were wronged when they were young, felt they couldn't speak out about it, and they let their shadow side fester and ultimately lashed out in the form of unaliving other people who reminded them of their abusers. Medusa's villainy is actually a story about injustice and rage. She becomes the embodiment of female fury, the shadow side of a society that refuses to protect the vulnerable. Medusa is every part of us that has been wronged and then shamed for reacting. She's every one of us that has been turned into the monster for being angry. The lesson here is not defeat Medusa. The lesson is to listen to her. And if we think about it, many villains have good ideas. They just go about it in the wrong ways. But if people would listen to them, maybe help them shape those ideas, better things could happen in better ways. Right? Killmonger wanted to use Wakanda's resources to help those who are oppressed around the world. Magneto wanted equality and justice for the mutants. Thanos wanted to increase the resources of the universe so everyone could live a prosperous life. And then there are people who are seen as villains not because they're evil, but because they work for or represent the things that we fear. Think Hades. Pop culture paints him as a villain, especially Disney, but in Greek mythology, Hades wasn't evil. He was the ruler of the underworld, yes, but he wasn't malicious. He was the one who made sure souls had a place to go and that the natural order was kept. He represents death, and most importantly, the acceptance of death. There are some surgeons who have to make the decision to stop resuscitation because it's been too long. People see them as evil. People who eat meat see people in slaughterhouses who work there and think that that's an evil job, even though they are the ones benefiting from the work that they do. If you think about it, Hades is one of the most honest gods in lore. He doesn't lie about what he represents. He doesn't sugarcoat mortality. But because we fear death, we demonize him. And here's where Jung's shadow comes in again. Our fear of death is one of the deepest shadows we carry. We repress it, we distract ourselves, we make death the bad guy. But Hades reminds us that death is not optional, and ignoring it doesn't make it go away. And that's the same lesson all villains give us. The parts of ourselves we exile don't disappear, they wait. And the longer we wait to face them, the scarier they get. Even trickster gods like Loki in Norse mythology weren't just evil. Loki breaks the rules, he causes chaos, but he also shakes things up so the gods can grow. Yes, much of what Loki did caused major problems for the gods, convincing Balder's blind brother to throw a mistletoe dart at him that killed him. Balder was the god of purity, light, beauty, and joy, so killing him caused the gods great sorrow. He also fathered the monsters who caused Ragnarok, which was the end of the world. Not entirely his fault, but if we're seeing a theme here, if he had kept it in his pants, maybe they wouldn't have been born and it maybe never would have happened. Just a thought. But there were some instances where Loki actually contributed to the gods' well-being and immortality. Like the creation of Mjolnir. That happened because Loki had bet the dwarves that they couldn't create wonders. Every culture has these figures. Kali in Hindu myth, who destroys in order to create. Set in Egyptian myth, he kills Osiris but forces a transformation. Coyote in native traditions, who makes mischief but teaches lessons. These villains are not simply bad guys, they're catalysts. They force us to confront what we've been avoiding. They try to create change in the world. So when we look at these myths, we see the same truth. Villains, whether gorgons, gods of death, or tricksters, are mirrors. Medusa shows us our buried rage. Hades shows us our fear of mortality. Loki shows us our need for change. And if we only see them as enemies to be defeated, we miss the opportunity to grow. Jung would say these mythic figures are our shadow. The moment we face them, we integrate something essential. So, what do we learn from this? We all have a shadow: anger, envy, jealousy, hunger, fear. Pretending we don't just makes it stronger. Funnily enough, the more you try to hide and bury these things, the more they show in other aspects of your life. Whether you realize it or not, you are lashing out, hiding yourself away, burning your dinner because you haven't faced things that are making you angry, sad, or unseen. Villains are the ultimate examples of this. And heroes at their best show us the path of transformation. I mean, to an extent, sometimes they're just portrayed as perfect with no need of transformation. Let's just look at every new female character lead in anything these days. But the point is not to deny your villain side. The point is to acknowledge it. You need to ask yourself, where am I angry but I tell people I'm fine? Where do I crave recognition but I pretend I don't care? Where am I ambitious but I disguise it as humility? Feeling angry, unseen, ambitious, these are not evil things. Used correctly, they can make you a better person. They can make the people around you see the things that they're doing wrong. You have to integrate these things into your personality. Figure out how you can be these things and also be someone who does good things in the world. Because when you repress these parts, they don't go away. They leak out sideways in burnout, passive aggression, bitterness, or even self-sabotage. Villains not only show us what happens when we stop repressing, but also when we stop integrating. So that's what we learn, but what does it mean for real life? It means that owning your shadow is healthier than denying it. Anger, when integrated, becomes boundaries. It becomes justice. Ambition, when integrated, becomes purpose. Fear, when integrated, becomes caution and wisdom. Villains externalize what happens when we don't integrate. Heroes show us the opposite: what happens when we embrace the shadow, face it, and grow. Many of us don't want to recognize our shadows. We don't want others to know that we have things that make us angry, abilities we want praise for, fears of things that could happen if actions aren't taken. We just want to live how we believe everyone else is living, completely happy with the way things are running and how we're treated. This isn't about being good all the time. It's about being whole. So the villains may not be role models, but they are mirrors. They force us to see the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore. And until you face the villain inside you, you'll never truly become the hero of your own story. So I'll leave you with these questions. Which part of you has been turned to stone because the world said your pain was too ugly to look at? And which villain do you secretly resonate with and why? Because in those answers lie the part of your shadow that is waiting to be transformed. Thanks for listening. If you liked what you heard today, please hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe. See you next Friday. And remember, whatever you do today, make it make magic.